Parasitic infections inspire a myriad of immunological functions to take place in the body as it engages in a desperate fight to clear the invading organism. We are going to completely ignore the fact that my voice just cracked, but the issue for our species and pretty much any other animal on this planet is that the infection is incredibly difficult to overcome. The reasoning is when a single-celled organism is engaging in a fight with something much more complex and multicellular, and it's also, quite a bit larger than itself, eosinophils tend to have difficulty as this kind of creates a one-sided fight, sort of like a 3-foot toddler trying to win a barroom brawl against a bunch of bouncers. Yes, the youngling could technically land a punch, but is it going to do any damage before it gets punted? Likely not. This is your immune system attempting to fight parasites. While there are most definitely mechanisms such as cytotoxic materials being released en masse to destroy the parasite, or possibly even body temperature raising in order to, make the environment more inhospitable to the attacking organism, the reality is your body has nutrients and you are made of meat. As a result, the parasite will typically continue to thrive within your meat suit in the foreseeable future. Parasites are creatures that, for all intents and purposes, can affect your biochemistry, cause deformations to arise, such as with elephantitis, and live within your very brain, inducing severe impacts depending upon your age. Even as adults, though, it's entirely possible some parasite infections can just render you 6 feet under with frightening regularity. In the spirit of these turbo douches known as parasites, one such parasite is the topic of today's episode. In the events of Resident Evil 4 Remake, which I know it has been a hot minute, the Las Plagas, which apparently is like saying ATM machine because Las means so the parasite, or if you call it the Las Plagas parasite, the parasite are an absolutely ancient species of parasite that appears to have plagued mankind for quite some time, but only because this species was originally plagued by a virus. This would result in 3 distinct life stages with several different abilities and drawbacks. So in today's episode, considering I've touched on Las Plagas in a prior video, let's go deeper into the morphological traits of these creatures, where they have come from, why they have sprung up the way they do, and why potentially Plaga C is not necessarily a guaranteed form that the parasite will take. We will also discuss how it interacts with the host's nervous system and why this increases their strength, because it's kind of an interesting topic. Like all good stories, we must start from the beginning. The critical event that would take place well before the Bronze Age in Spain, where Las Plagas was assumed to have originally burrowed out, which is not true. Way back prior to human history in North Africa, a species of insect would, for one reason or another, come into contact with the Lord's scariest organism, a flower. This flower, however, was unlike any other flower, and this was an evil flower, because it contained a virus that would pretty much result in every single problem the Resident Evil universe actually has. It contained the progenitor virus. This virus appears to be able to infect any animal regardless of species, genus, family, whatever. Which makes you think progenitor virus versus the flood spore, who would win? Anyhow, it just seems capable, again, of latching onto any cells that come across it, which, strangely shouldn't be the case. On our cells, and really any animal cell, there are receptors. These receptors are what viruses will latch onto, and then they're brought into the cell, so that they're basically out of the line of fire concerning being destroyed by the immune system. This would seem to imply that considering this virus can infect and alter any animal, that it must be forcibly spearing cells with genetic material because it must not be using the receptors, given that while we do see viruses jump from different species, it is kind of more uncommon than you might think. But this would bypass the need for a receptor that, one cell might have and another might not. As a result, it likely would have its own reverse transcriptase also injected within it, which means it would build more of itself, allowing it to continue to infect. Because of the long-standing infection that it's not able to really be overcome by the immune system or any animal's immune system, this would in turn likely would mean that it is a DNA virus that implants into the very genetic coding. This would inspire all sorts of mutations that we would see later as genetic coding of the creature has been corrupted. This is why you find all of those entries and logs that's like, day 1, we grafted gorilla arms onto a scorpion and injected it with the T virus and have been poking it with a stick for 24 hours. I hope it doesn't escape. Day 2, it escaped. I know, that is a shamelessly stolen meme, but it's just hilarious because that is quite literally every single thing written in Resident Evil. Anyhow, this would clearly reactivate dormant genes as well and inspire changes in the body such as extra limb growth, bone alterations, increase in strength, and in general, when anything hulks out, it is coming from this virus affecting the actual genes. So as this virus infected the arthropod species initially, this in turn would cause them to fundamentally change. Whether they were a parasite to begin with or not is sort of an unknown, but what is assured at this point is that they are most definitely parasitic. These parasites would then move out and they would begin to infect other organisms, and considering they had the virus in their bodies. This allowed them to mutate and be able to interact with another animal and exist within them, even if they would not typically be the desired host. So the thing to remember about parasites is they typically have a few hosts that allow them to actually live out a proper life cycle. Take Toxoplasmosis gondii, for instance, and I had to do my senior paper back in college on these guys. Didn't have to, chose to do it. They infect rats, right? The parasite moves into the brain to inspire odd behavior like running around out in the open as opposed to, under logs or kind of in the corners of rooms to stay out of sight, essentially. And this would attract predators into these wide open areas where they are, because these are dangerous to the rats, so it basically makes them free food. Felines are on the chopping block so that rats actually do become attracted to the smell of their urine. Once eaten by a cat, or in this case also birds, their life cycle progresses where eggs would be excreted with the feces of specifically the feline. But in some cases, actually, humans or birds, again, will come into contact with this, and we are what are considered to be imperfect hosts or intermediate hosts to these creatures. But despite this, they can move into the brain of humans and birds and actually also make us attracted to cat urine. Now with humans, if we're attracted to cat urine, it's not really, it's gross, don't get me wrong, but it's not really going to make us end up getting eaten by a house cat. However, birds may not fare as well and they can get eaten. So the person hoarding cats down the road from you probably has a toxoplasmosis infection. And the issue is that this is just a PSA for any pregnant women out there and all that good stuff. You do not want to scoop the cat box if you have a cat that's an inside-outside cat, because you can actually get infected with this parasite and it can affect gestation of the fetus, and it can move into the brain of the fetus, which is not a good plan. That can affect pretty much their whole life. So if you're with somebody and you're pregnant, it's their turn to take over, basically dealing with the cat box. Anyhow, so Las Plagas does not appear to suffer from this same problem as far as intermediate hosts or definitive hosts are concerned. There is really no intermediate hosts, only definitive hosts, and this will allow them to continue its life cycle. Given that these creatures are arthropodic, and you have to wonder, where did they originally come from? Now, there's a debate concerning the actual origin, but if you look at the native species of Africa, I see two possibilities. Given their parasitic nature, it is entirely possible that they are a species of tick. After all, they are bloodsuckers, meaning that they already have parasitic tendencies, they have 8 legs, and they exist in North Africa right now. But the question remains, how did they come into contact with the flower? Because of this glaring issue, I think it's something else potentially. But before moving on into talking that, as always, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you do enjoy this type of content, because this is Resident Evil and it doesn't really do as well as some other videos on this channel, but I do enjoy making them, please leave a like. It really does help this video. Also, as always, I'm posting on Roanoke Tales like for real now. I'm doing it live. 2025 is the year. Roanoke Games, I had to take a break because I went out to Texas and then like all over God's green earth, so I'm back now. Anyways, check out my Discord also, where we watch movies every month that end up here. So, what is out in North Africa that could possibly be this? Well, there's a species, and I'm going to butcher this. Its name is Atenius africanus. It is a species of vinegaroon living in Senegal, the Gambia, and Guinea-Bissau. These are of great importance because while not considered to be in North Africa, based on its location on the west side of the continent and it being coastal, means that at some point in the distant past, a traversing northward may have been possible. It's important to remember that the Sahara Desert is not always a desert. In fact, actually also something you can, I love this fact. Desert has 1 S because you want less of it. Desert has 2 S's because you want more of it. Anyways, it's important to remember that in the future, the Sahara Desert is not going to be a desert. As Earth oscillates in its orbital precession, this will cause the desert to actually turn green every 21,000 years. Roughly 6,000 years ago, it was green. In another 15,000 years, it'll go green again. I believe what may have happened is this species moved northward during this greening event, where it would end up in North Africa. The behavior of vinegaroon may have also exposed it to this progenitor virus because it prefers dark, humid places like under rocks, in caves, within rotting wood, essentially, in caves again. Anyways, so they sit and wait for passing prey, where they will begin their attack as they move forward with their pincers. This behavior is still seen in the Plagas today, and they have 8 legs, with the front 2 obviously being altered in the vinegaroon because it's used offensively. Also, they have a raised tail-like region. I believe it's the abdominal region, or abdomen region as they call it. And they have a tail-like whip as well, and the overall body structure that the adult has is very reminiscent of Plaga C. So I would put Plagas as being an altered form of vinegaroon that migrated to the area and then became infected by this flower, as some ended up in a cave where the flower with the progenitor virus was. So from here, the virus itself would take over, altering the behavior of this species and completely change the body size for them as well, infecting other animals around them. Eventually, it would run across man, where there is evidence through murals that man intentionally infected others with this parasite. This would be clearly them under the influence of someone who's like already infected by the parasite, as it would begin to corrupt their minds, spreading the parasite even further. Eventually, somehow during the Bronze Age, this parasite would be brought into Spain, where the Los Illuminados would begin forming, which would be a cult hell-bent on spreading the parasite even further beyond their borders of the nation in order to spread their own influence, or so they thought. Of course, they were absolute brainlets controlled by the parasite, because clearly they're spreading the parasite's influence, not their own. It's just an imagined, I guess, control. So they would go on to infect many others, which around this point in time, someone would begin to take notice, and they would step in. Gregorio Salazar would lead an absolutely devastating crusade, like the Ultra Chad that he is, against this parasite. Eventually subduing those who were infected, they would then be forced into a cave system, and with no more hosts or nutrition and it being a low oxygen environment, the adult forms of Las Plagas would quickly starve and succumb, but not before some of the microscopic forms of the parasite would be encased in amber inside of this cave system, leading them to enter a state of deep hibernation. Now, as we can see, this behavior is not really intrinsic with the vinegarin species. First, as we know with the Las Plagas, there are dominant forms and there are subservient forms. We will be discussing specifically the subservient variations today, but this behavior would almost put them in line with, say, ants. However, given the body structure and the already predator behavior, I would still lean them towards being vinegaroon, but just know it's entirely possible this could also just be ants that became infected, that grew in size and still kept the same eusocial structure. In fact, let me know down in the comments what you think, because I'm gonna be honest with you. We have already seen hybrid species created through the influence of the parasite, so it is entirely possible it could have just been a combination event. Anyhow, hundreds of years later, this giant dork known as Osmond Sadler, who came from the original banished Ganados on a nearby island, apparently was still beefing over this as he discovered the Las Plagas and wanted to try again for funsies to see if he could become a cult leader. Leading the Los Illuminados once more, he would then convince Salazar, who was absolutely done dirty in Resident Evil 4 Remake, to let him into the mines where they found Las Plagas to be truly extinct, which bummed them out. However, as they kept mining into the amber, some of the locals would be infected by the microscopic organism, which was airborne, which is also absolutely terrifying. And that brings us around to the actual parasite development. Those who were exposed early on had several concerning reactions to the parasite. An actual immunological response would be launched in order to subdue the parasite in those who became initially infected. Reaching the lungs, the person's macrophages, which patrol the alveolar sacs, would immediately attempt to attack the parasite. However, as the parasite burrowed deeper into the lungs, this would induce chest pain along with a bloody show and a cough. Fever would also spike in those infected, but it became clear past a certain point the parasite was there to stay. Considering its proximity to the spinal cord, that it's, in the lungs, it would then burrow its way through the lungs and attach itself to the spinal column, likely drawn in by the neurological activity within the area. From here, within the bloodstream, it would release certain chemicals that would have a myriad of effects on the person. In some ways, this would cause brain damage. In others, vasodilation was quite prevalent. By dilating the blood vessels, more nutrition could reach the parasite from these actually just being open. Clearly, in some cases, this vasodilation would burst some of the finer capillaries in the lungs, causing blood to show up in a cough. This same vasodilation would also happen within the brain, which if you've ever had a migraine before, imagine that just on steroids. Your whole brain would be on fire. That's basically what's happening. We also see the same expanding of the blood vessels in the sclera, with the eyes turning red. You might wonder how vasodilation works. Well, I'm here to tell you. Basically, it's just the smooth muscle known as the tunica media inside of your circulatory system, or in like the veins and arteries and capillaries. Capillaries! Ha! I knew that was gonna come up. Capillaries. I heard one of my professors one time say capillaries, and it has affected me ever since. Anyhow, it just relaxes, which then causes them to expand. So obviously you could tell if there are basically anything bursting within the brain, then areas of the brain will start dying, which is definitely seen because the brain damage that mounts up inside of the gonados is pretty bad. Also, the blood vessels in the sclera, I think I might have mentioned this, but those will expand as well, which causes the eyes to appear red. So as the infection continued in those with the subservient version, this would result in the townspeople as seen. However, when taking them out, the parasite does not appear to have implanted in them all that long ago. As a result, the immature forms resides within them, and once they are gone, the parasite drops alongside them. However, this is also dependent upon the light levels outside in the environment. It is known that UV radiation will absolutely body Las Plagas given their subterranean formation, and this would seem to imply that even though they are darker in coloring, in some cases, possibly this being owed to their vinegaroon heritage, the issue may come down to genetic stability. This species obviously is highly susceptible to gene changes, which allows them to exist in a state of perpetual adaptation, I guess you could basically say it, to all of their environment ever created. Sounds pretty great until you realize that energy can totally screw up this balance. As UV radiation strikes a cell, all thymines located next to each other, or basically thymines in general, would just bond. Now, probably not all thymines, but enough to basically cause the gene structure to undergo rapid destruction due to the genes being broken. The error-checking polymerases actually do not appear to be present in great amounts to fix these issues, basically because of how just absolutely gene recombinating this creature is in general. Like, I can't imagine there's anything trying to keep these genes from changing because they just change. Oh, you got punched in the head? Congratulations, your head is now 12 times the size that it was 4 minutes ago, and it can be used as a battering ram. That is literally what happens to your genetic structure. Anyhow, so because of this, I guess you could say, putting all of your stats in offensive rather than defensive when it comes to gene fixing, the cell will quickly succumb, and then subsequently so does the parasite. But this issue is not unknown to Las Plagas, as they will also flee blue light, as blue light represents sunlight, which this species knows is an immediate apoptosis event. Plaga A, as it's known, is the most immature form of Las Plagas. Man, we are hating on these things today. They do not possess any legs at this stage, and will internally appear as a bunch of tentacles. In fact, Plaga A is also seen within these suits of armor that come later on in the game. It's just a collection of them working together to actually move the armor, so these tendrils can also be assumed to help move the body that they are controlling. But you can kind of still think of them as like a fetus at this point. They have attached to the spinal column and are overriding the brain, taking away the control from the person. Leon and Ashley also got close to this stage as the parasite grew, but they were able to keep it under control with antigen, which then slowed its growth. However, even at the previous stage, the even more immature form can still take control of the body if directly exposed to a dominant Plagas, as seen when Sadler controls Ashley. During the day, this form is stuck inside of the person, and if it comes out, they will be burned by the sunlight, which will result in their end. They appear to be able to understand this as they have a direct connection to the human ocular organ, which we were about to see. Using the eyes, it can feel that the light is present, as likely the pineal gland is indicating to the rest of the body that daylight is out and about. At this point, the parasite is resting, so to speak, continuing to grow unless something happens to rouse it from this state. When entering the village, everyone at first is just continuing to work and mill about. However, once Leon is spotted, this alerts the parasite of his presence, which then control is immediately taken away from the villagers. At this point, the cerebrum is no longer in control, possibly due to damage, and several areas of the brain are overridden. It should be noted that brain damage, again, is very common with this infection, and the person appears to be conducting muscle memory tasks that they did prior, not so much thinking about it. Given the location of this infection being on the spine in between the heart and lungs, any signal sent to the body from the brain is now overridden by the parasite given its location, and this has caused several things to happen. First, strength is increased just by the body being unshackled from the brain. Within all of us, which is actually my favorite bit of biomechanical fact, we never actually use all of our strength. Most of us access roughly around 30 to 50%. This just protects our joints and our muscles from breaking down. That's about the standard operation. In powerlifters, for instance, they have been said to access roughly 60 to 80%, but even that means they could lift more, their brain just prevents their body from doing so. In fact, there was one guy who had a 400-pound boulder, I believe it was, or maybe it was even more, that could have been 800 pounds. Basically, it fell on him, and it was, the way he had his arms was in a bench press position when to stop the boulder from crushing him completely, and he was kind of falling down a cliff while this was happening, and he was able to bench press the rock off of him. Completely tore his pec away from his shoulder, but he was able to do so, which then threw the rock off of him. That went over the cliff's edge, and he was able to survive. That must have really hurt. Anyhow, that's just kind of, even then it said with adrenaline, you still do not access all of your strength, because if you were to access all of your strength, it would just be muscle separating from bone the entire time. So when the parasite invades the body, this strength modifier, as you can call it, is removed. So if you're wondering how you get absolutely manhandled by the women in the village, well, it's because the strength was always there, they just couldn't access it in their uninfected life. This, however, is not a complete positive. As strength is increased, finer movements get kind of crappier, to be honest with you. Think about like a chimp trying to use finer muscle movements. It's more difficult for them, and if you didn't know, that actually it is. Like, it's not just an understanding of what a pencil does, but even like their riding abilities, just trying to do really fine tasks, it's more difficult for them because they have more strength, like more strength focus. As a result, the people may be stronger post-infection, but their finer movements of walking and grasping things are less focused, making them look like they're just kind of lumbering. It should also be noted that the parasite itself is directing the body, with likely some help from the motor cortex and the parietal lobes, as well as in the cerebellum. This interference in its location would also prevent more refined movements because it's kind of trying to control. It's like driving a car from the back seat almost. So at night is when everything changes. Being referred to as guadaña, I believe it's called, or scythe, upon encountering this underdeveloped plagas, when the brain is eliminated, or at least blood flow is prevented through ceasing function of the heart or breathing, the plagas will determine through fusing with the eye that there is no daylight around. It will then explode the skull in an effort to survive and get rid of the immediate threat. A bone scythe is then formed from the body, which can be then used on a whip and then swung around, which is highly dangerous. So if you're injured enough or unlucky, this can just take you out in one hit. But the bone scythe is very likely bones used from the original person's body that have been changed and attached to the parasite. Or essentially, they're using cells like osteoblasts from the body to actually form new bones within its own body. The muscular tissue of its own body is really hard to tell where a human ends and the parasite begins, but whipping around at a high rate of speed, this can completely sever the neck of a non-infected human, leading to the end of that person via decapitation. What happens from here is kind of an unknown as well. I mean, at least your head wouldn't be thinking past this point, so it's not like you know. But it's likely, however, that due to the underdeveloped parasite and its reliance on the human body, the body would quickly run out of functional nutrition and oxygen as muscles would then cease to work. However, for a limited amount of time, the parasite can force fire the nervous system and contract the muscles via the neuromuscular junctions to walk forward clumsily in order to attack. But again, this is very likely a limited event, as life-sustaining functions in the body have very clearly ceased. So as time has passed, the actual time frame that this seems to take place is a matter of days, meaning the townsfolk were maybe just infected a few hours prior or just the day prior. Those that are up in the castle appear to have reached the next logical stage, and this is known as Plaga B. They have abandoned the scythe, or more likely the scythe has become part of massive jaws that these creatures possess. Being about roughly the size of a human torso, it seems like they can kind of accordion in on themselves in order to save space, but it can be assumed that they are in fact inhabiting the entire area, pressing into organs, the lungs, and the heart, creating issues for the body, but still allowing it to function. They do have some legs at this point, but they're not able to completely live without a host as they are still gestating. Known as mandibula or jaw, they can extend their bodies quite easily to reach further. At this point, a few of the legs have formed on the top portion of the body, but still muscularly, they are firmly attached to the body of a human. The jaw has formed to have 4 protrusions, and their skin is lighter in coloring given that they are a subterranean species. They also appear to possibly have tapped into the acid production of the stomach, which they are now able to shoot out and injure somebody. Should somebody be highly injured, this acid can be the final straw and induce injuries to drop them. However, should a person be careless or get too close, or maybe just want to give somebody a hug, the jaws will then clamp down onto the head and shoulders of that person, completely decapitating them in the process as the head is eaten rapidly. This will leave their bodies stumbling around for a moment, given how quick the process is before they drop, and I'm assuming they just become food. However, much like the scythe, Plaga B does not seem to be able to leave the body that it inhabits. It may be that it is developed enough to survive and continue its gestation, but the body around it will no longer be living. It may use the rest of the body's nutrition in order to keep itself growing, but it's unlikely it will survive long term, given the most formed Plagas or Plaga C can only exist for a while outside of the host before its own expiration. And this brings us around to the last form, which is known as Plaga C. This is the arana, or arena, I believe it's called, which is basically spider, which I know, I'm calling it vinegar room, but it's called spider because it has 8 legs. I get it. People want it to be a spider. It could be a spider, but this form appears to hold several inconsistencies that shows its history, but also shows where changes kind of arose. This variation of Plagas still exists within the host, probably just coiled up around the spine. They possess 8 long spindly legs that can be used to run, and basically support their own body, they also appear to have webbing in between these legs. At this point, when they exit out of the body, they can fully detach from the host and begin kind of moving around on their own. Each side has 4 legs as they run, and on the underside they possess a fully formed mouth with several sharp teeth. Tendrils will emerge out of the back of the creature, possibly owing this feature to its vinegaroon heritage, and further up there appears to be one that is not like the others, or at least it's not like a whip. So what is this? Well, we know Las Plagas can lay eggs, but it's not known at this point in time how it does so. So if I were to take a crack at it, I would say this area of the tail appears to be where eggs could possibly be laid. It seems to me the whip-like area could be used for offensive slicing, where the parasite is then riding on another creature. This wound would then have the egg injected into them, and this would allow for the infection to be complete. However, with this version of Plagas, it has several different abilities at its disposal. First, it is clearly able to jump onto humans, dig its legs into the spine, and then control that person. Now, interestingly, this is only seen with others who are infected, which seems to imply it has no qualms about using a host of another that doesn't appear to be doing what it needs to. So it will, even if another Las Plagas is controlling a human, it will then go and control that human. And this indicates that even during the gestational period, there may be a hierarchy that forms amongst subservient Plagas, and it will direct the body to attack another human. If it's on its own, it can still use those legs to basically jump and then climb onto a person and then stab those into the shoulders and upper chest region of, say, Leon, taking him out. With others such as Ada, sucks to be her, it will jump on her back, stabbing into the delicate tissue of the neck, completely decapitating her in the process. This form of Plagas is quick and will hide if necessary. They still appear to be susceptible to the same UV radiation issue, and ultimately their ability to interact by essentially stabbing into the spine and then accessing the human nervous system is greater due to the fact that they can really use any body walking around or that is on the ground, which means essentially these legs, I guess, would have to have some sort of neurological interaction point to be able to stab into the spinal cord of a person and then still operate them. Plaga C is considered to actually also have a potentially different pathway. They appear more aggressive and behave like soldier ants, indicating that this species may have specific assigned jobs. Some are tasked with protection, some are tasked with foraging, and some are tasked with breeding. This would seem to indicate that there is a eusocial order within Las Plagas, which may mean they behave somewhat like ants. However, the actual species infected, like the original one, isn't unknown. It's just something that had to be changed by the actual progenitor virus. And we see basically the culmination of this eusocial interaction when at the very end, when you take out the most dominant form of Las Plagas, every other Plaga starts freaking out and drops because they no longer have any idea what to do. Overall, Las Plagas is a rather interesting parasite from its creation and how it gestates within the human body. But if you'd like more information on the intricacies of this formation, I did cover that in an earlier video, which I will put in the cards. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, leaving a like would be great of you, and subscribing is a great way to stay up to date when I post. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, Roanoke Tales, and Games link in the description. But speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, I'd like to thank our astronaut, Tristan Kessick. Thank you, my man. Next, I'd like to thank our astrophysicist, Death Dancer, and Feather. Thank you guys as well. And my scientists, Eris, Dakota 23, Invictus Echo, Metric System, Official Texan, and Virix Hellstrom. I do appreciate y'all's support. And to everybody else, like the rest of my patrons, you guys are also ballers. It keeps everything running smoothly around here, which is greatly appreciated. But all right, that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I'll see y'all in the next one.